Football Daily. Phil Mackey, Judd Zolgad, Declan Goff in the house producing this episode. And with Aaron Rodgers finally speaking publicly a few days ago about his status with the Packers and saying, listen, like as much as I want to spend the rest of my life and career in Green Bay, sometimes those things are out of your control. It leads us to a discussion about not only Rodgers in the division, Kirk Cousins, Matthew Stafford, and whatever the hell the Bears have going on. How would you characterize the quarterback situations based on stability in the NFC North, Judd Zolgad? And where do the Vikings fall?
So the most important word that you use there is stability. So not like the best, because in my mind, despite the fact his play has tailed off in recent years,
that factors in too, though, right?
Rodgers remains the best, though. Like if I had to take one for one game right now, I take Aaron. But when we talk about the jumping off point, stability, I go from 4-1. Bears, because I don't know. It's Trubisky and Foles. I think it's going to be unstable. Foles, but Foles, when he leaves Philadelphia, has not had great success.
Yeah.
And so there's no guarantee that that's going to work. Trubisky appears to be a train wreck. So the Bears are just the Bears. I put Matthew Stafford and the Lions 3. There was talk that he might be traded. I don't know that stability is a word that you can use with Stafford. I know stability is not a word that you can use when talking about the Detroit Lions.
Correct.
They just don't have it. And so with the uncertainty there and with the uncertainty, is Stafford going to be the guy continuing going forward long term? I don't know. I put them 3. So the Bears 4, the Lions 3. Previously, for how many years? I mean, we've now had 28 years of essentially Favre and Rodgers.
Mm-hmm.
And guys come and go as far as starts occasionally when Aaron has been hurt, but it's 28 years, near 30 years of the same two quarterbacks, one in Canton and one going to Canton. So for years and years in the discussion that we're having right now, the Packers were 1, but I put them 2. I think, and again, very important, I'm not saying Kirk Cousins is the best. So I'm not saying that I've had an epiphany and I'm in love with Cousins as a quarterback and I think he's great. I think he's good. I think he statistically is very good. But if we're talking about when these teams wake up in the morning and do they know what direction they're going for sure at quarterback, and I guess just as importantly, do we know? I put the Packers 2 now for the first time in a long, long time, and I actually put the Vikings 1. I might not even agree with the direction that the Vikings are going, but the stability of their quarterback situation right now to me is pretty damn crystal clear.
All right, so this is interesting. I think there's 2 different categories when it comes to stability. I do think you have to take into consideration how good a quarterback is because, listen, the Vikings had a stable quarterback situation when they drafted Christian Ponder and had him under team control for 4 years. Yeah, it's very stable. We know who our guy is. We know how much money he makes. It's not very much, and we know that we can build the rest of the roster. It's a very stable situation contractually and just like knowing who your guy is. But he's terrible. So it's not stable if the quarterback isn't good. Now, Kirk Cousins is far better than Christian Ponder, but if I'm ranking the quarterbacks in the division based on how good they are, Rodgers isn't what he was 5 years ago. He's still, to me, the best quarterback in the division.
Agreed.
Pro Football Focus would say the same thing with their rankings the last 3 or 4 years. I think in terms of just how good they are, and then we'll get to the second component, which is more contract age. Did your team just draft your replacement and all those different things?
Mm-hmm.
I actually think Matt Stafford and Kirk Cousins, if both are healthy and both play 16 games, I think they're both pretty similar in terms of statistics. They're both going to throw, 30 touchdowns or so. They're both going to throw some dumb interceptions, but they're not going to train wreck a ton of games for you. And they're both sort of fringe top 10 quarterbacks, and they're both like 32 years old. So Stafford and Cousins, whenever you're ranking quarterbacks throughout the league, I think most people would have Stafford and Cousins in a similar category almost every single time. Like, is anyone putting Stafford a huge notch above Cousins or vice versa? Probably not. Like, you could split hairs on both those guys.
Mm-hmm.
The biggest difference between the two of them, in his career, Matthew Stafford has 34 game-winning drives. 34. Kirk Cousins in his career, fewer games as a starter, has 13 and only 1 with the Vikings. So I look at Stafford as a guy he's in one of the worst organizations in the NFL historically. They continue to botch draft picks and hire bad coaches and have controversy. And Calvin Johnson decides to retire in his prime because he doesn't want to play football for the Lions anymore, right?
Just like Barry Sanders did.
But he still finds a way. Like, people rag on Stafford because he's not perfect and because, he does throw dumb interceptions sometimes. But
he's good.
Ultimately, I think he has overcome a bad organization more than most guys would. And I would be curious to see a guy like Stafford with the Niners or the Steelers or like the Patriots.
Absolutely. Right.
So in terms of like just how good the quarterbacks are, I still probably put Kirk third, slightly behind Stafford, and for sure behind Rodgers. Just to start there.
Okay.
Agree or disagree on that?
Agree completely.
Okay.
So, right. No, I'm talking the word stability to me, it is not an indictment or a praise of the quarterback. It's what team do you see that's not train wrecking, that's doing probably the best job of saying this is the direction.
Okay. But let's get to that part because I actually think let's look at a few components. Let's look at, because I think all these factor into stability. How much do they make? How long are they going to be the starter for? And in the case of Rodgers, the answer is probably not as long as we thought maybe 2 months ago. And what does the guaranteed money look like on the rest of their contracts? And when I look at Rodgers, Cousins, and Stafford, forget about the Bears. Like, they're going to be off Trubisky after this year. Nick Foles isn't the long-term answer. Nick Foles, outside of 2 great seasons, specifically with the Philadelphia Eagles, with different circumstances, like Nick Foles is just a guy. So I'm removing the Bears from this entire conversation, just for the record. Rodgers is 36. Cousins and Stafford are both 32. All right, so age difference for sure between the two. Rodgers makes 33.5, Cousins makes 33, Stafford makes 27. The $6 million difference, average annual value between Cousins and Stafford, might get you an extra slot cornerback. I think that matters. I think the price tag on these guys and the fact that Stafford comes cheaper than Cousins, cheaper than Rodgers, and might even be better than Cousins, I think that moves him up in the stability rankings for me. In terms of like when you could get out from underneath the contracts or when teams would be looking like the Packers to move on to the next guy, it looks like they both have about 2 years in all 3 of these guys, I should say, have about 2 years left in guaranteed money. You can get out from underneath Rodgers without a huge penalty in about 2 years. Kirk Cousins, pretty similar because they guaranteed him, $60 million upon the signing of this new contract extension.
Yep, 61, yep.
And Stafford, it's $19 million in dead cap after next season, and then it's far less after 2021. So they're all paid about the same. Stafford, probably a slot cornerback or a guard less than the other two. I think they all can be free or vice versa, free from their team or free from the quarterback of their contracts in about 2 years. And so with all that information, I actually think the Lions have the most stable quarterback situation because they're paying less for their guy than the Vikings are paying for their guy. Does that make sense? So I'm actually putting the Lions number 1 on this list.
It does, but the Lions are so poorly run, and because there was talk about was Stafford going to be traded, and that didn't happen, but I now see that his house is for sale, and his wife's trying to explain, we just want to move. Yeah, no, that's not true.
Brady said the same thing, by the way.
Exactly.
A year and a half ago.
I think the Lions, if they were run effectively, you might be right, but they're not. They're poorly run. Stafford, I think I'm with you on this. I think he's been a good quarterback, but they've never gotten things right around him. And so in a perfect world of things being done in the correct way, what you just said makes sense. But because it's not, I can't give them that. And the Packers, here's the question with the Packers. As much as it might cost to try and get rid of Rodgers in the next 2 years, when it comes to Jordan Love's contract, there's diminishing returns here as well, right? Because what's the advantage to plugging Jordan Love in? It's partially the fact that the Rodgers contract gets off your books.
Right.
And then you've got a quarterback who they now can control essentially for 5 years.
Especially if Jordan Love's not going to be as good as Rodgers, the advantage would be, all right, the quarterback's not as good, but we get these 3 other players.
Exactly right. And so where there's a lack of the known with Packers, and there's definitely a lack of stability to me, is the question of when are they going to pull the trigger on Rodgers to get the contract off their books eventually to take advantage of the Jordan Love contract. Now, in the case of Aaron, when he came into the league, I don't believe that the draft pick slotting was in place then, correct?
No, it was not.
He just had his contract.
Yeah.
But now there's that 5 years. Okay, if you draft him, you got to play him. And so that's where there's a lack of stability with the Packers to me, is the unknown, which I think uh, Aaron is very much talking about too in his comments, as to how long are they going to go down this path with me before they turn it over to Love, because of what you just said, Phil, which is the influx of, oh my God, now we've got this cash to spend elsewhere
Sure.
because we're not paying our quarterback.
Let me ask you this question about these three guys, all right? Would you swap Kirk Cousins for Matthew Stafford right now? You get if you made the swap, you would obviously get Matthew Stafford, the quarterback, and
His
his
contract?
price tag, which is $6 million less per year average annual value.
Yes, I would.
I'd have to look at the cap hit,
But yes, I would.
I would too.
With what you're saying, yes.
Not even really a huge knock on Kirk. I just, like, if I could get the extra $6 million to
Matthew
pair
Stafford,
with the $7 million I have in cap
good.
space and get a starting cornerback,
He's good.
it matters.
Absolutely.
So how much do you value stability at quarterback? Because I don't know if I value it as much as you do. Like, everyone's always looking for, all right, who's our guy? Well, if you're going to lock into Andy Dalton for 5 years, congratulations, you have stability.
Actually, I don't.
And you're never going to win a Super Bowl.
I don't. It's the weird thing in this talking to me is the fact that the Green Bay Packers, who, again, close to 30 years have had the same two guys, are about to move on from the second of those two guys. And I don't have a feeling of, well, Jordan Love's just going to continue the trend. He's going to Canton too.
Yeah.
No, I don't feel that way. And I don't know. And the Packers are definitely taking a flyer here. But if they're right, they're geniuses, because it's 5 years of control, which is why Jordan Love has to play at some point fairly soon. So it's not that I value it. It's just the fact that the Vikings and the Bears have always been these teams where the quarterback position seems to be bouncing around. And at least when I look at the Vikings right now, right or wrong, and they very well might be wrong, they do have a level of stability in the knowledge of who their quarterback is going to be that they have previously a lot of times not had.
Yeah, I will say
So
that, like,
I'm not saying I think it's great. I just think it's an interesting fact.
I think the most important part to this stability conversation, and it's something that was sort of mocked. Our friend Matthew Collar, by the way, purpleinsider.com, if you want to read his written work and listen to a podcast project about the 2017 Vikings, just a plug for our guy Matthew. So Matthew did the rant on Score North a year ago about code words, right? Kirk Cousins gets done with the first season, and they go 8-7-1, and Kirk talks about, well, it'll be great because we'll have another year under our belt of understanding the offense and the code words at the line of scrimmage, and Collar went ballistic on code words. But there is some truth to, when you talk about stability, having a quarterback with a lot of the same, pieces on offense and the same system and the same language, and everything kind of slows down when you know exactly what system you are operating in, as opposed to jumping around to different stuff year after year. And so from a stability standpoint, I think the Vikings do have an advantage going into year 3 here of Cousins, and a lot of the same things compared to, maybe, I don't know if it's necessarily an advantage compared to the Packers or the Lions right now, but compared to some of the other teams in the NFL, and the fact that those teams aren't going to be able to practice and get together with new coaches and stuff.
Key thing for
like
this.
If you can keep things as similar as possible to last year, and some teams can't because they have new coordinators and new coaches, it's going to be a huge advantage, especially in the first 4 to 6 weeks of the season. So I would give that part of stability major credit for the Vikings.
Do you think the Packers are doing the right thing?
In what sense? By drafting Jordan Love?
No. Well, and in transitioning to a quarterback who, I mean, there is a talker that we have not explored much until now about the fact that they clearly want this salary off their books, and that there's
Be
now
careful
a feeling.
what you wish for.
I agree completely, but I think you are going to find some people who make the case to a certain degree that you just did about stability, about comfort being a nice thing, but is that always the right thing? And Jordan Love's going to step in, and he's going to be cheaper. And yes, he might not be as good, but the Packers, again, with Aaron, have won exactly one Super Bowl title. So it's not like they've got 5. I don't think they're doing the right thing personally myself, but I do think it's an interesting discussion that I'm willing to bet some people do.
I would say right now, if you have Aaron Rodgers, even at age 36, if you have Pat Mahomes, Russell Wilson, and even to some extent 43-year-old Tom Brady, but I would maybe put him in a separate category, and maybe like Drew Brees, if you are a bona fide Hall of Famer and still playing at or near the top of your game, I'll pay you whatever. I'm not going to pay you $50 million, but if the going rate for a top quarterback is $33 million, I pay you, and I do not worry about how much you cost. if you are anyone other than those quarterbacks, I very much like this Dak Prescott thing. Well, why don't the Cowboys just pay him? Well, because he's not Russell Wilson. He's not Drew Brees. Like he's going to be making more money than those quarterbacks, and he's not as good. And therefore, it makes it so much harder for you to build the rest of your team on the same level as some of these other teams. So I get the hesitance. Like, would I pay Dak just based on, like, I'd probably just pay him, but I don't blame the Cowboys for sitting there thinking, wow.
But Dak still might be going up that hill.
That's why
Aaron is definitely not going up that hill. That doesn't make him a bad quarterback, but he's definitely coming down it.
But I think people act like Aaron has like tumbled all the way down the hill, and I don't know if I would go that far.
Well, the question becomes this. If the Packers were diligently trying to get Aaron a better supporting cast,
yes,
does Aaron instantly raise up to his play of, let's say, 5 years ago? Or have we now passed that point? And yes, it might be better, but it's still not going to be the brilliance that we saw at one time.
Yeah, it doesn't make to your point from a few minutes ago, it doesn't make a ton of sense to pay Aaron Rodgers $33.5 million at the top of the quarterback food chain, or he's like the third highest paid quarterback, if you're also going to then draft his replacement and not continue to fuel that team with things that can help Rodgers. You might as well just get out from underneath that thing as early as you can, if that's the case. So thank you guys for hanging out with us on Purple Daily. If you are viewing our show on YouTube, please click the subscribe button. It helps us grow the channel and spread the word. And if you listen to the podcast, give us a 5-star rating and a positive review on Apple or wherever you're able to give us that rating and review. And we'll see you next time here on Purple Daily.